go on to the next session for 5:15. So in this session, we have a moderator with 3 speakers to share their views and experience on the topic for disruption versus collaboration, delivering unmatched value for startup and corporates. So we have our moderator, Ms. Tataga. He's the head of projects for Beyond Force in Berhad. And we have our panelist, Alan Fong. So he's the head of Group Digital for Damansara Holding Berhad. He's also the independent non-executive director for IFCA-MSC Berhad and Inity Corp listed on Brussels, KL. So he's also the certified coach with the ICF organization involved in business coaching and mentorship programs under Magic, MDEC, and Cradle. He's also recognized as top 50 IT personalities by Computer World Magazine. So coming up, we have the second panelist, Mr. Jay Song. So he's the founder and CEO of Fintif Berhad to provide cloud accounting, advisory, and financial management solution for both Australia and Malaysia. He's also the mentor for various groups such as FutureLab.my and Meranti. And our third panelist for today is Nicholas Au. He's the co-founder plus CEO for Look Foods and Sprago Eats. So I will pass the floor to you guys.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in today. And the Asia Pacific PropTech Summit has given us the opportunity to discuss a really interesting topic. So disruption versus collaboration and the value to deliver unmatched value for both startups and corporates, right? So disruption is a word that we commonly use in the startup space. And you see a lot of startups looking at providing services, products that are not commonly used or in that particular domain, or coming up with a different approach to do a certain job, right? So the idea behind this is to disrupt the market and in order to grab more of the market share, as well as to look for different approaches in doing the same thing. On the corporate side, what you see commonly is corporates trying to stay with the pace of the external industry, working with their partners, working internally within their internal teams, working with startups, collaborating with startups. And the idea is to not stay still. So staying still in a particular domain is not really an option. So now, keeping this in mind, we want to look at what are the things that we should look at in terms of a collaboration. Is disruption the right way to go? Would collaboration be more helpful? What is the right way? Is there a right way that we want to look at in terms of this specific, conundrum that faces a lot of startups and corporates today? In order to take us through a number of these questions and, add value to this conversation, we have a really, really good group of panelists that are joining us. So I thank them for joining in. And I think we can start with some of the questions that we might have to begin with. So maybe I can bring in Alan in on this first. So what are the important, ways a startup and corporate could collaborate? So here I'm talking about from the perspective of improving their product or service and overall economic growth.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the question. Yeah, definitely from startup point of view, they will always be looking for expanding the market as well as potentially sometimes even investment, yeah. And this is where potentially corporates can meet those needs. And corporates from time to time will be looking out for good solutions to meet their requirements. And for corporates who may not be very well equipped with the right IT team to evaluate and to understand requirements, this is where they would need to collaborate with outside help, like a startup or a scale or even a scale up. Yeah. So yeah, those are the things we were looking at in terms of in what areas they can collaborate. Obviously, in terms of solutions, it can be ranged anywhere from enterprise systems to some of the front-end solutions. Yeah, those would be my opening remarks. We can look at more things as we discuss along there.
Right, absolutely. So taking that into consideration in terms of the startups and what do they look forward to in terms of collaborating with the corporate? Maybe Nicholas can come in on this.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, I think startups are definitely the catalyst for the economic growth, both I think globally and locally as well. I think us as entrepreneurs, we always find I would say a problem that we are very passionate about and we try to solve it. So I would say this particular collaboration definitely I would say create a lot of win-win solutions. I think namely has what Alan has said, certain corporates do not have the I would say the IT team or the tech infrastructure to facilitate what they're trying to achieve. And also for us as a startup, we definitely have the ability to also, I would say, test our products and definitely have real users to get feedbacks from. And I believe ultimately, if the pilot project is successful, I believe the end users will definitely benefit a lot from it, as well as from an economic growth standpoint. I think the startup definitely becomes a much more stronger company, and that entails into hiring more people, as well as creating healthy competition, and most importantly, pushing people to be more innovative and creative in terms of solutions.
Right, absolutely. Jay, any thoughts on the same?
Yeah. I mean, like, good evening, everyone. I mean, just on this particular collaboration topic, I believe that I think corporates is always want to stay relevant to the market, especially to the market that they are operating in, as well as the geography location that they are operating in. So therefore, I believe that the collaboration point to syncing between the startup and the corporate is that both of the key management personnel, right, can always work together to identify the trend. Because I mean, a very simple question is always like this: why startup can thrive? Why this particular company that's actually disrupting your solutions can thrive? Is because they are actually address a market or address a solutions that you have probably long enough for, or you're probably not even aware of because of the sizes. But what it tries to indicate is that this will actually bring the trend as become an awareness program, where once the market is knowing that this kind of pain can be resolved, then they will turn back and ask their corporate solution provider to resolve this as well.
Right, absolutely. So in terms of what I get from the three panelists is, with regard to collaboration, there are multiple fields in which startups can collaborate as well. And in terms of leveraging, there is a little bit that can be gained from both sides, right? So for a start, I think that as a starting comment that actually takes us really, really well into the next question. So what we want to ask you, Jay, is in terms of the key collaboration points between startups and corporates, firstly, to begin with, what would be the key factors that they can collaborate on? And as the relationship progresses, what would you look at as good collaboration points?
Yeah, I think definitely the collaboration point is always meeting the demands and the needs between the both corporate and the startups. Because a lot of times, right, the initial process we always identify is that whatever the startup solution is procuring or actually providing doesn't actually relevant to the corporate, simply because that the corporate clientele does not require this solution as yet. Because they have been operating long enough and they have been surviving long enough. But in terms of new customer segments, that's what the corporates are maybe a step slower than the startups. So I believe that the collaboration point is basically that they need to understand where the future of the market demands are and why this startup actually is able to address that need. So I believe that the future needs is the collaboration point that both startup and the corporate need to address together. I think the second point that I can put off is basically the expectation of the successfulness on this particular demand and the needs of such solutions. So definitely this is the syncing up between what the corporate is expecting versus what the startup is actually achieving. So I think the last point that I just put on it is, of course, is the talent fights in the market that to address such a collaboration, because a lot of future demands require a future technologies involvement. And this particular involvement requires the talents. And these talents is actually scattered around everywhere. But how to actually net them together or connect them together to provide such solution is always a challenge between either for the startup based on the remuneration perspective or even the corporate based on the corporate legacy issues.
Right. So I think as a beyond for being a startup accelerator, what we do see amongst a number of the startups that come in is that there is a serious mismatch, in terms of the skill that they require and what they have. And so you also see a lot of employees being moved around to perform, functions that they're not actually suitable for. I think this is one of the collaboration points between startups and corporates that can help, especially with regard to very specialized talent. Right. Apart from that, like you mentioned, in terms of the product, in terms of the technology that the startup might be maybe a little bit ahead, integrating that technology for the corporate needs, I think could be one of the key factors, right? So maybe a good time to bring in Alan on this from the corporate perspective and how, startups can integrate the different ways that corporate works, as well as how they can function together cohesively.
I think maybe I touch on, expand a bit about what Jay mentioned just now, in that sometimes there is a mismatch in terms of, I think Jay, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned about this. And so I think there's perhaps two types of scenarios as far as corporates are concerned. Those who are very progressive and very well structured and very professionally run. And maybe there are also even those who they're a sizable company, but somehow may not be very professionally run or maybe complacent. This is where you find a lot of inefficient processes, very old processes, and a lot of manual processes. So the opportunity can be bucketed into two. One, with those who are very progressive, right? And you start up this company, it's slightly easier the gap will be smaller. But if it were to be this case, whereby, sometimes corporates may not even realize that they need or they can automate their solution. They'd be happy with, I think just now, the lady was talking about 9 people in a company just doing reports, and they're happy with it. They are happily doing it without knowing that there could be a better solution, right? And so this is where the opportunity is, and also the challenge is, how do you work with such corporate to convince them that, hey, if you adopt my solution, I can help you. Yeah, but so there's quite a lot of old mindset that needs to be changed. Yeah, so this is where startups may have to work harder to knock on more doors to uncover some of these opportunities. Yeah. So.
Absolutely right. So on that front, Alan, just I think it brings us to a point where the way corporates function and the way startups function culturally quite different, in operationally quite different as well. So how do you bridge that gap, like to get these two to function in a way where it facilitates growth, it facilitates scaling and so on, right? And to integrate the technology part as well. How do you bridge that gap between the two?
So in terms of collaboration, definitely there needs to be a middle path middle ground where both meets together, because as you rightly say, corporates tend to be more structured, more more SOPs, where startups tend to have less SOP and less structure. So there needs to be a meeting ground halfway through. If a corporate decides to adopt a startup solution, maybe sometimes they may have to change their procurement policy, for example, to simplify a bit and to downgrade some of the requirements. And startups will have to meet somewhere halfway. I mean, if you see a tender document that's maybe 50 pages, you might have to just say, okay, let's go through with it, Yeah. So there needs to be a meeting point, yeah. So it really depends on the startup's target market. If it were to be SME, then they have a different set of requirements. But if it were to be corporates, then there is a totally different set of requirements. So both sides need to understand how the game is played and where to make the points. Yeah. So for the people who are the corporate, we need to realize that sometimes we have to make adjustments. Yeah.
Right.
Of course, then there's the other element that if you were to be an investment angle, then that may be a bit tougher, because a lot of corporates' investment appetite, as well as what they call it, their criteria is very different from that of a VC or PE. So sometimes if you were to follow traditional setup, a real corporate may not be able to invest. They may have to set up a different arm to just look into investment. Yeah, those are a few things I can think about in terms of how do you bridge the gap. Yeah.
Right, perfect. So I want to get a little bit of Nicholas's thought on this as well. In terms of working with corporates, how do you see, the differentiation being bridged in terms of the gap, in terms of how you operate, in terms of how you think, in terms of how you ideate, so on and so forth, right? So what would be your thoughts on that?
I think for us, through multiple successful pilots, I think what both the panelists have said, I think the most important thing is managing each other's expectations, as well as I think meeting in middle ground. That is, I think, the first thing that we've learned. So why is this important is because I think the severity of different products at different business units, just say, for example, a financial solution or something to do with HR procurement, that has a lot of high risk, which I think it's tough for, corporates to even, just say, hey, you're a small startup, let me allow you to maybe I'll switch over to your HR solution. So for us, how we looked at it was we were a bit more thoughtful in the sense that we go in with a smaller product, also testing with a smaller target market, which entails our early adopters. And that actually, I would say, helped us to at least get a foot through the door, rather than asking for the sky and, like wanting to, change everything from a group level. We went in from a business unit level. We try to speak to the key stakeholders and try to maybe understand their problem first. And then once we've gotten, a bit of trust from a few business units, that's when we start to go from maybe the department level or the group level in that sense. So I think that's very key because us as startups, we are always about speed, reiterating. However, corporates do not work that way. They've got some sort of a functioning process. So for us, it was hard to tell, like, hey, we're different. So what we do is we try to definitely understand their processes. And it's also good in the sense that it helps us to build a foundational framework of what a internal process should look like for a startup as well. So that's our take on it.
Right. So I guess it's a little bit important to go in with an open mind into a collaboration rather than a very structured, inflexible approach, right?
Yes.
I think that's what we commonly see, even through our accelerator programs. We commonly see that startups that come in with an open mind, willing to learn, willing to make the required changes, are the ones that usually progress at a much faster rate. Right. You do see startups that sometimes they could be very okay, this is how we're going to do it, my way or the highway types. But unless, unless they have something special, it becomes a little more difficult. Not that they won't succeed, but it becomes a little harder to do. Anyway, there's a question for Alan specifically. Of course, others can jump in as well. So let me just quickly read that out. As a corporate, what are you looking for when you're considering to work with a startup? If possible, could you share red, yellow flags when evaluating startups?
So, Takata, can you repeat the question again? I cannot see the question.
Yeah. So the question for you is, as a corporate, what are you looking for when considering to work with startups? If possible, could you share red, yellow flags when evaluating startups to work in a collaboration?
From corporate's point of view, I suppose, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so when we look at a startup, I mean, at least for my company, I would imagine most companies would want to look at proven solutions. Because like what Nicholas alluded just now, it'll be very high risk to try a new solution just for the sake of whatever you talk about it. Unless it is entirely new area, cutting edge solution. Yes, obviously that nobody has done it, then we need to take some risk. But normally we are looking for proven solution in that there at least should be some sizable corporations who have adopted, if possible. So those would be one of the main criteria. We also look at the team, whether it is quite well, we're not expecting a full-fledged team, but at least the critical members of the team, because longevity is important. We don't want to adopt a solution whereby in 2 years it's no longer around. And then obviously the dynamism of the team as well. Red flags. Definitely, if a lot of companies can say and talk a lot about things, but if they cannot substantiate their market acceptance, then it's going to be hard for us to look at the company. So I always ask this question: give me your top, say 5 or 10 if possible, largest customer, then I can tell whether this company is potentially suitable for us or not. the list of clients is a very good indication of how good the solution is. No point telling me how good, how great, how many scientists you have behind you. But if there's lack of market acceptance, then we'll probably see maybe come back in about 3 months' time or 6 months' time. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm being very realistic. Yeah. Yeah. So that is the hard reality of talking to corporates. Yeah. Takata, yeah.
Sorry. As a follow-up to that, how comfortable are corporates collaborating to run pilot tests for a new solution for startups?
No, like I said, pilot is not an issue, provided we have such requirement. But just to highlight, I mean, we have to be very careful. We have limited resources. We cannot be running pilots all the time. And I always say this, when you want to evaluate a solution for transparency and governance from a corporate standpoint, we need, for example, we need to have at least, let's say, 3 or 4 solution providers before we say, okay, I think we can sort of narrow down on 1 or 2 that we can pilot and start having more serious discussion. So we have to create it by our own governance as well. So I hope startups will have to understand this. I saw a question about how to prevent from being taken advantage of. I mean, sometimes you have to be smart. Yeah, if you are a startup side, I also come from the supply side as well in the past. I heard so many stories of companies being taken for a ride. It's quite normal. Yeah. It's a reality of the market. So you have to be very smart to somehow identify signals, talk to the right people if possible. If you cannot get to the decision maker, at least the people who can influence the decision maker. And if, for example, you cannot contact a certain person for a long time, that's not very good sign lah. You know what I mean? Yeah. The person is not responding to you. So sometimes it's not just one way. I need to say this because sometimes I find, see, it works both sides as well. There are some who are very particular or who have hidden agenda from the corporate side. I'm sitting in general, I'm not specific pointing anyone. On the other side of the fence, there are those who think their solution is so great and to think that, the world needs them. So that's also the other problem, So we have to have a balance, and so startups have to be to need more feedback from people around them. Don't just what we call shots in TV. I've seen quite a lot of companies, good companies, great companies, but I've also seen quite a lot of shots in TV companies as well.
Right, absolutely. And I think if people don't respond, it's probably not a good sign, not just in the workspace, but in life as well. Yeah.
Perhaps. Potentially, yes.
Right. So Jay, just wanted to bring you in here and get a little bit of an understanding on this. What are the red flags that you see in terms of collaborating with startups, early identifiers perhaps?
Yeah, I think for let's say I spoke from the corporate side, it's always being that the startup solution doesn't always comes to the expectation that what has been preached for. I think the reason behind is always between, like I said, the expectation. I mean, bear in mind that for a corporate, right, they have been running years and years. So for a startup to actually matching the expectation for the corporate is always very hard. Why? Because the solution that the startup actually provided, right, I can guarantee at least 90% doesn't fit into the workflow and the processes that the corporate is running at all. Because basically they are disrupting the entire whole processes. It's not disrupting the market, but it's disrupting the corporate workflow. And this particularly that actually making the gaps wider and wider. And the moment that both of them cannot close the gap very through like effective and truthful communication, then that's where the gap is going larger and larger. And bear in mind, corporates, right, is having those once bite, twice shy kind of thing is because, just like Alan has mentioned, you have stumbled a lot, you have success a lot, and you also have stumbled a lot. That experience itself, right, is also a very important evaluation for the startup to understand that not just about being taken advantage of, but they are also preventing themselves from being taken advantage of. That once they because normally, right, a startup, like let's say Alan just now say a short scenery startup, let's say for example, when they approach a corporate, right, they thought like it's like $1 million or like at least $500,000 of revenue already. But the problem is that the solution never matched, because every startup always say, if I hit a corporate, right, I need to have at least a revenue like 6-figure, 7-figure, and this kind of thing. So that expectation, right, is normally comes back to bite your own self as a startup. So it needs to be very and you know, for corporate, right, the red flag and yellow flags, right, is very easy to flag up as long as the communication workflow started to break down. It actually flagged. It could be straight away go to red, not even a yellow.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that through our experience working with a large number of startups, I think within the last 6 months, we've done almost, about 100 startups that have been accelerated through our programs. Now, what we have seen very often is the lack of structure that we see with these startups, right? Sometimes they have a great solution, they have great people working for them, but they don't have a structure which streamlines them so that they can work most efficiently, get the most bang for their buck, so on and so forth. So I think in theory, at least, working with a corporate which is quite structured in their approach should help them. But at the same time, you also probably need to maintain that balance where to ideate, you need a certain amount of freedom as well, right? So I think that comes in where it becomes really important to maintain that little bit of a balance between how corporate works and startups work as well. I'm kind of glad that you brought up, the issue of expectation and how to manage expectations from both the startup side as the corporate side as well. So maybe Jay, I can start with you in terms of what should a startup expect while working with the corporate, and then I'll probably bring in Nicholas to get his thoughts on what their expectations might be from the startup perspective.
Yeah, I mean. For a startup to actually work with a corporate, right, then I think, believe me, no matter how you hate about the corporate because you come out and start up your own business, right, unfortunately, you are going back to that same system again. So once you went back into the same system, then you are actually immersed back to that. So once you immerse back to that, then that is the system that you have to follow, because as a startup, with working with a corporate, right, you don't get to dictate. I mean, this is a cold hard fact, where it's actually the corporate dictate you, moreover you dictate over. So I believe that this kind of relationship has to be managed effectively through a proper, like you say, a very structured communication. When I say structured communication, it means reports. Why corporates always talk about reports, and why people quit corporates and start up own company or work somewhere else? Because they hate reports as well. So everybody knows that. But the fact is that once you're going back to the system, unfortunately, it goes back to the reporting system. But how the report is efficient or not, that is the thing that what the startup is trying to disrupt as well. Because all your solutions have to generate a report that's insight, that is fast, relevant, that doesn't need 9 people to generate, as what, the previous panel was discussion that hiring 9 people to do a report. If you can just churn the report straight away, it is still the report. That process doesn't go away, but you solve it to do that. So I think this is the collaboration and the concept to meet the expectation, is that corporate will still have to evaluate every single step. So they don't evaluate based on like objective. It doesn't based on the result. They will evaluate every single point of milestone that you are trying to help them to achieve along the way. And at some point in time, things will change, because when they change a key personnel, the expectations suddenly will sweep. And that expectation has to rebuild again. Because for startup expectation, it's very easy to manage, because the owner and the founder will always be the same. For as long as the startup's there, 99%, the expectation can be managed. Yeah. Right. So I think that expectation of managing has to come from the wisdom from the startup more than the corporate, because I believe, right, I mean, a key takeaway here for all the startups is that corporate expectation is very easy to expect. Basically, the one that you hate it, that's what you expect.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nicholas, what are your thoughts on having a boss that you need to report to now?
I would say 2 parts. I mean, it's definitely not very, effective if, the reporting is very much mandated, in every other week or month. But I think overall, having someone to report to also has, allows us to be a lot more accountable. in the sense that, we're making this particular decision, be it financially or operationally, we at least have somebody to run it through, or even, just go back and forth and ultimately make a final decision. This is the most optimal way to move forward. So that's definitely a upside of, I think, the reporting side. But to get to the reports, to be very frank, I think us as an early stage startup, at one point, we're just figuring out how do you do, internal HR processes, how do you run payroll well, and after a while, you start to realize there are actually tech solutions that solve that as well. So I would say the expectations for both corporates or startups, I think for us being a startup, the expectations is that, hey, once we've got a pilot project, we're good for the week, good for the month kind of thing. I think that's definitely not fair, because like I've shared earlier, assuming that, once you get one step foot through the door, the corporate is going to, let you free hand to do whatever that you want based on the solution that you have provided, is definitely not going to happen. And I think that's a very key misconception that, ultimately, whether you have the opportunity to speak to the corporate, to even pilot a project, I think your product speaks most. It has to solve a problem. And once you reach that situation, I think the next thing for us was, do we adapt our solution specifically for this corporate? Do we have the bandwidth to do that? Or do you want to say, all in all, let's just drop this pilot project? So I think these are some deliberations and expectations to also share with our fellow startups, because, it doesn't mean that, once you've got something running, it will concurrently run in more departments, or it will be an endless process that, embedded into the corporate's system per se.
Absolutely. So Nicholas, what I get from, what you've said as well is more of a conversation in terms of the reporting as to what your expectations are, what you can get out of it, what is of value to you, both from outgoing information as well as incoming information is what helps you rather than just having a hierarchical structure where you need to report, right? So
yes. And I think what happens during the reporting is also very important. I think basically, sharing with the corporates, hey, this new feature that we'll be launching, or any new product that you're launching, there's also, time for internal testing, and when can you go live? I think always clearly communicating with, your users or even merchant partners that you're enabling, it's very important to give them this timeline, so that ultimately they are able to also adapt and also hopefully risk mitigate together in that sense, and the product doesn't break.
Right. And I'm guessing it has to be a little bit of a facilitating structure as well, where, you can see your progress along the way. And that kind of adds value to your reporting rather than feeling that it's just for the sake of passing on information.
Yes.
Right. Really excellent point there. So I think one of the things that we want to talk about is, in terms of the reporting itself, what are the factors that would help, firstly, corporates understand where the startup that they're collaborating is doing well or not. And secondly, at the same time, simplify it to the extent where it makes it easier for both the parties to work together. So maybe I can bring in Alan on this to get some thoughts on what is it? What are the key factors, the KPIs that, at least on a simple dashboard kind of or a traffic lighting structure, that would help you understand the performance of the startups as well?
For me, I mean, if it were to be a project, I'll be looking at the progress of the project. Obviously, any projects, we would have to identify some of the key milestones. So the achievements of that is very important. If it were to be, monitoring and managing is very important, and regular review is very important to iron out any delays and so forth. If you were to be from an investment standpoint, then we have a quite different reporting. So we will be looking at quite typical revenue, cost, strategy, how to grow the business and all that. But I would agree it has to be a balance between over-reporting and under-reporting. So find something in between. Otherwise, it can be too much of information also will not be very good. I tell you an example of when I was working for a government agency. One of my staff come and tell me, you know what she said, Alan, this report must fill in everything. Then before I could answer, you know what my staff say? I think we just give them some basic information because I don't think they read the report every week on.
Right. Absolutely. Very, very, very common among so many players.
Wow, okay, that's great insight, man. I mean, reports are only looked upon when there's trouble. But if it's just a static report that goes in every week, and maybe you just give, I mean, it's a balance,
Yeah. So I'm guessing what would really work out in this collaboration is from the point at which you get into a collaboration, identify the objective and the expectations, and then you can mark out what is it
right.
really know without burdening the startup where they cannot focus on their core function, but at the same time have enough time to report where there is an active discussion to add value to this collaboration, right?
Yes. And after that, tracking and managing is very important. A lot of people just say, okay, we agreed, then we don't track regularly and we don't review. So that can be a potential downside as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we would like to talk about then is a lot of corporates are setting up corporate accelerators, right? And they either are focused on specific industries which they're already in, or say technology based, looking to identify startups that can probably expand their product lines or add value to the existing product lines that they have. Now, so what do you think would be the value that a corporate accelerator would add to a startup? And what are the success factors there? So maybe I can begin, Jay, on this.
Yeah, I think in terms of the corporate, the role that the corporate is playing in terms of the accelerator, definitely we have to give corporate a very, very good, I would say thumbs up, because they actually take the initiative to actually go into the market to actually experience the solutions that's going to disrupt their own industry based on the future trend that they anticipated. I think the motivation can come from either that they know that maybe somewhere down in the other side of the globe, this is going to be a trend that's going to disrupt it. Then when it comes back to their own, then they saw that in Malaysia, the trend is still far catching up. Yeah. Then the second one is basically they are looking at solving their own pain point, because that will be the time where they started to see I'm very painful throughout these corporate structures, and is there any solutions going to solve it? But I think the way that they play up to the collaboration needs to be well tested and well, I would say, organized. Because a lot of times they say that I want to start this pilot with this another startup. But the problem is that the whole objective is not clearly stated and structured. So they know that what result they want to achieve. But the problem is that throughout along the way, startup doesn't know what the corporate want. Corporate doesn't have a key personnel who are dedicated to this project to articulate and orchestrate the entire process. So actually, a lot of times why pilot tests fail is because of the execution, not because of the ideas. So, and the corporate itself, whether they have that capable person to actually orchestrate this particular pilot test by understanding what the startup is doing, is also very important, because most of the time they might thinking that, the startup doing this way, why they are doing this way, I don't even understand, but just that, okay, it worked this way. So that's why I think the Accelerate program is a, I would say, it's like a mentorship ground between the startup and the corporate to actually work together to sort of building trust together in terms of understanding what your solution is going to impact. And being a corporate is always a very good, the resources. I always have a small business unit for you to test it out. I also had another business segment with this business unit for you to test out. And this is where the key person to able to organize with their respective business unit owners, not the group level, but at the business unit level, to entirely work out the project. Because put it very simple, a cold hard fact is that all this kind of experimental cost, right, is always flushing back to the individual business unit. They will say group CEO say that this particular cost has to write into your P&L because of research and testing and pilot. But fair enough. Then that's where the real resistance comes in terms of the execution. And I believe that convincing it and for the style, I always say that to be successful in the accelerator, what you need to do is that you need to identify the milestone that you're going to solve and organize in a way that some are the big milestone to achieve first. And then you achieve a small milestone, which is negligible, but maybe the corporate don't even stick an eye in, but at the same time, it solves the connecting problem. Then you achieve another big milestone again, and then you achieve another small milestone. You don't achieve every single small milestone and then come up with a big milestone. Then the small waiting time is actually hurt the corporates a lot.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think with running an accelerator program as well, unless you have dedicated people and expertise that can track the startups, guide the startups, facilitate their path along, the development, it becomes a real big challenge to monitor them. If it's going to be that we're going to bring in a startup, we'll see how we can leverage, we'll leave them alone to do their own thing, and then come back and see how it's benefiting us. I think that becomes a huge challenge as well. And that's what you see with a lot of corporate accelerators, and some of the reasons why they do fail, right? I think from the point of selecting the right startup, integrating this the startup into the into the corporate, as well as taking them through that journey by to some extent hand holding them, I think becomes really important as well. So Nicholas, having been through a couple of accelerators now, corporate as well as an agency sponsored program. So what are your thoughts, and what do you think could be the value add, and how can these accelerator programs maybe add value to, in your journey?
Yeah. So I would say the fact that, corporates are also moving into accelerators, that's actually a huge, I think, win for startups. The fact that, they're probably trying to bridge it, so on and so forth. So the interesting thing for us in our journey, I think, like what Jay has said, or even Alan, the person that actually runs it, or that what we call that link between the corporate and even the startups, I think that person's a key factor. Why so? Is because I think if that person understands, or maybe it's a bit more tech savvy, willing to take on more risk, or ultimately, they are well connected in the ecosystem. I think as founders, that is like the most important things that we need. Be it their technical experience, be it their business acumen, or just the network that you have, or they have. So where I see this happening is that once I think these corporates starts to run the accelerator program, that's actually a huge win. But tracking, managing, and having the right person, that's equally as important to ensure it's successful. And I think the next thing to take note would be for startups to really understand that when you go into a corporate accelerator program, you really have to understand that the solutions that you're building will be used by the corporates and users. So it has to be really amazing. And most times not, obviously as an early stage startup, the product is, MVP level, or, it's not able to facilitate such a huge user base per se. So I think the understanding what the corporates are trying to solve, going into their accelerator program, integrating yourself into, their part of being part of their solution, I think that's going to be a very effective way for startups to validate their ideas, go to market quickly, and ultimately reiterate an amazing product.
Tata, you are mute.
Yeah, Tata, you're muted. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So considering we're having this conversation in the PropTech space, so maybe a good time to bring up a couple of questions with regard to that. So Alan, in terms of collaboration between corporations and startups in the PropTech space, what are the key gaps that we need to look at, and what would help facilitate corporates maybe move a little bit faster, work a little more efficiently, whatever may be the case, with the help of startups?
I think generally PropTech is quite a largely traditional business, and there's a lot of opportunity to automate a lot of things. Yeah, so for us, for example, in the facility management space, Damansar Berhad helps building owners manage their parking. If you recall, there's a company called Metro Parking, that's ours. Today, we manage something like 50,000 car parks in whole Malaysia. So there's an opportunity for automation, which we are doing now, and we are engaging quite a lot of startups to help us. Then there's the cleaning services. We're looking at potentially robots. We offer engineering maintenance, and also later on we will be doing security services. So even in engineering maintenance, we need a lot of solutions around the area. So that's facility management. Then for people like property developers, definitely that is an area where companies like, so I don't own any shares in this company, MHub is doing a pretty good job in terms of automating the front end of the sales process. Even the company sit on IFCA is also doing a good job in terms of the enterprise system. Yeah. So definitely a lot of opportunities. So it's just that startups need to uncover those problems. If I'm not mistaken, I remember I challenged Jason and team I think about 5 years ago, when they first talked to me, I said, I don't think what you're doing makes sense. So they were a bit ruffled. And so I thought, okay, I tell you what, you didn't agree with what I had to say. I tell you what, let's check back with each other in 6 months' time and see. So they pivoted the idea. And I think that's where they were able to make a lot of inroads in automating the front end of the sales process. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So I think we're pretty much at the end of our time. So I want to ask one last question. With regard to, say, the Malaysian Proptech Association or the Asia Pacific Proptech Association, what is the role, right, that they can play in order to facilitate the collaboration between corporates and startups? I'd like to bring everyone in. So let me start with Jay first, and then we can move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what MPA actually like holding this particular conference is actually absolutely role models actually to connecting between the startup and the corporates. Okay, bear in mind that corporates are very big, and the persons that who actually looking after the solution may not be the owner itself. And even when they say the owner is only the director, and the director back end the shareholder is also different people as well. So I always say like any association who are actually running the facilitator program is always a good initiative, because I use a very simple analogy. It's like why the shopping mall exists is because it's actually put every single product into that space that everybody can go and shop for. And for the corporates to actually look for the solutions is rather than just going to Google and then wondering like whether like Affinity myself is good or not, whether the look of food is good or not. But if that platforms like how MPA was doing now is showcasing the businesses that's actually operating within the PropTech scene, then it actually gives insights to actually individuals, corporates who really need to tap into the services and solution for them. So I think this particular role is actually what the PropTech has to be upheld for. Not about like buying and selling or facilitate any sales transaction within that, but more like showcasing the products to the corporates that this is what our country is going to head it for, and this is what your industry is going to trend in the future.
Right. Nicholas, any thoughts on this?
I would say definitely the fact that, there's a PropTech association, namely in Malaysia or even APEC. I think these sorts of associations act sorts like a union per se. So, they definitely, gather everybody there, consolidates, the key stakeholders, be it, solutions provider, end users, or even corporates trying to enable these solutions. And ultimately, they build a collaborative space. Everyone can just speak out, probably, connect and even network in that sense. So I think what these associations do, it definitely furthers the particular vertical or tech vertical. If, we have more associations, and the associations are definitely more vibrant per se, so then, we can have a lot more events and build a community in that sense. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, and I think this, having a network of people within the same space gives you a lot of leverage and opens up a lot of doors as well, right?
Yeah.
So Alan, last word on the role of MPA and so on in a particular space.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very familiar with industry association like MP because I was the CEO of PICOM once before. So as an industry association, you can do a lot of things. Chief of it, among others, would be representing the industry to the stakeholders, be it government or other stakeholders, be a promoter of best practices and standards, and perhaps even bringing together the supply side and demand side as well through exhibitions and conferences and promoting use cases as well. Yeah, so definitely MP has got a good role to play, definitely.
Absolutely. All right, I think we're out of time. So thank you so much, all the panelists. And it was really great getting insight from all of you in terms of your specific perspective and even in general. I hope everyone who's watching this enjoyed it, and do reach out to us on LinkedIn. I'm guessing would be a good option. And handing it over to Toby now.
All right, thank you. Okay, by the way, right, because Tataga, I think there are also some of the questions which is still in Q&A box. So for the speakers that they are still here, maybe later on you guys can still reply to the messages there. So yeah, and I would like to thank Tataga here for helping to put everyone together for these wonderful panels, and thank you for the speakers for your sharing and also your thoughts here. So we shall see you again soon. All right. Yeah, so thank you so much for the time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.